Well, I am incredibly excited to have Shelly Gallup on the SSI Executive Conversations podcast. I've known Shelly for a few years now, and she's got a strong focus on strategy, governance, risk compliance, and is really a high achieving leader around quality assurance and regulatory affairs as an expert in the medical device and the IVD diagnostics industries, demonstrating success in managing positive interactions with the FDA and a variety of governing regulatory agencies domestically, internationally, to help bring positive products to the marketplace. Throughout her career, Shelly's developed a wealth of knowledge related to life cycle management of products at all levels of risk, including cardiovascular, anesthesiology, respiratory care, which as a respiratory therapist, obviously I have a passion for, dental, general and plastic surgery, pain management, point of care, as well as testing kits. Prides herself on enabling people to think differently, initiating meaningful shifts in what individuals consider to be important and directing those minds towards the goal at hand with discipline and transparency. So interconnecting, bringing people together. Currently holds an executive position as the Senior Vice President of RAQA for Prismatic Dental Craft, Inc., which is Glidewell Dental. Simultaneously serves as a consultant or advisor for Multiphase LLC as the co-director of educational programs to the Orange County Regulatory Affairs Discussion Group and Board of Directors. She's had just a great career thus far, has previously held positions as Senior Director of Regulatory Affairs at Innovo Medical Group, the Director of Regulatory Affairs at Sequoia Diagnostics, holds a BA in Chemistry from California State University, San Bernardino, an MBA from the University of Phoenix, and completed becoming an exceptional board director through that candidate program certification course. She is a highly respected and skilled leader that has successfully led numerous global government regulatory meetings and discussions that resulted in more effectively bringing products to the market. And she is a solution-driven leader whose recommendations and strategies often roll up to the board level. So thank you so much for your time in joining us here, and I really appreciate it.
Thank you. That was a great introduction.
Thank you. A little bit at this point, but let's just dive right in. I know, when you and I first met, when you were at working on IVD at the time at Sequoia Diagnostics, you have a broad range, as the introduction speaks to, a product experience, class 1, 2, 3, for medical device in the United States. You've worked on PMAs, 510Ks, obviously, class 2 IVDs for 510K. Now you're in dental products. So how has your career path been determined relevant to product categories? If you kind of walk us through that a little bit.
Yeah, so I like to think that product categories have not determined my career path. I think that my career path has been more determined by opportunities that have presented themselves. Most of the positions, I'm sorry.
I said I probably should have positioned the question a little bit better, but that's kind of what I wanted to get to, is that it wasn't necessarily specifically about the product. So I appreciate that point.
Right. Yeah. So, a lot of positions that I took resulted from a recruiter reaching out to me, or somebody that I've worked with in the past said, hey, you should really come to my company, or, I like to, I think this would be a good position for you. So, yeah, that's why I think that it's been more by the opportunities that present themselves. I'd say as far as product categories go, there's always going to be a learning curve going to any new company with a product that I've never worked with. And I love that. It gives me the opportunity to learn something new. And I remember, like when I got into dental, I'd never worked in dental before. When I worked in heart valves, I never worked in heart valves before. Infusion pumps, same thing. But I remember at a company I worked at a long time ago, there was a woman that was it was a huge company, the director of the department. It was early in my career. she was leaving the company after being there for 8 years. And I said, "Why are you leaving? This is a great company. Why would you ever leave?" And she said, "Because," she said, "because I have 8 years of 1 year of experience."
Mm,
Meaning she'd been doing the same thing year after year and she wasn't learning anything or growing or doing anything different. So she said it was best for her to move on.
yes, I can understand that, especially in terms of what I've been doing the last decade. So one of the things that you just said that I think is I'd love for you to expound on and give your perspective on. So I added regulatory affairs as a functional area to help with talent opportunities in the second year at SSI. And so I've dealt with all different kinds of perspectives from a leadership standpoint, but I've helped companies take people that have never done IBD before, that were excited about the complexity around, the biocompatibility section or the testing versus maybe orthopedics or something that they've done before. And when I first started in the industry, if you didn't have not just regulatory experience, but if you didn't have specific, let's say, 510K submission experience or
Right.
governing body interactions around that particular product, it's like they wouldn't even talk to them. Which, when
Uh-huh.
you look at the challenge around supply and demand around regulatory talent, and I kind of always compare it to, you know, a bakery. Just kind of simplify it for me, but cakes and pies, it's like if you can bake a cake, you can probably bake a pie.
Right.
As a regulatory professional, emotional intelligence, de-escalation, and understanding the process while leading the stakeholders, they're not going to write the biocompatibility section, take care of the software section, take care of the art. Your different people are going to do that. So if you could speak to how you look at that in crossover talent within different product categories.
Yeah. I mean, and that's what I think about too. I mean, it give me a good, whenever I've gone to a company, I always ask about their product training. What, do you have product training? If they don't have product training, sometimes, a lot of times they have it for like the sales team. So, and it's usually like a 2 week program, and I'll jump in during the first week during the product training part of it, and then the second week's usually for the sales team on how to sell everything. But I mean, I think that, if they don't have a product training group, then I'd go to the SME for that product. I'd say, "Hey, can you tell me about this?" Usually, they have multiple products within the company. I'd go to the person that's responsible for that product line and say, "Give me some, tell me about this product. What does it do? How does it work? Show me it. I want to see it, feel it, touch it." And I mean, if you have great emotional intelligence and you can figure things out, you can kind of maneuver your way around the company and learn what you need to learn. And
And
I'd
there needs to
say,
be something in it for the candidate, like something exciting that they're going to your point, they're going to get to learn, they're going to get a who are they going to become and what is in it for them.
right, right. Well, and I'd like to add even, yes, I've gone to a lot of different companies. I've worked in different product lines. I think that broad range of product experience demonstrates my adaptability to any company.
Absolutely. So another thing, I'm gonna, how this kind of organically goes, but I'd like for you to speak to. I mean, success is challenging. Being in business is challenging in terms of startups. 40% of startups don't make it a
Yeah.
few years. Half of those are gone by year 5. So 80% of companies don't make it 10 years. So it's really interesting when you think about it from that standpoint. And leadership relevant to mission and vision on why companies succeed and fail creates alignment or misalignment, and then the right or wrong talent. If you look at failed clinical trials, submissions that uh, aren't approved the first time, the challenges there, and then obviously FDA warning letters, $1 million per company, 6 billion annually. Most of the data shows that it comes back to leadership having the wrong talent in the wrong seat for a variety of reasons. So when you just said at the beginning that, hey, it hasn't been driven by product specific, really, it's been more about the cultures and the opportunity. I think companies sometimes miss the bigger picture in attracting talent and how that experience is for the candidate. So maybe you could speak to what things you during your career were looking at and the things that attracted to you during that process to lead you to them from a cultural standpoint.
I would, before going into any interview or, of any position that I knew, I'd always do the research on the company. There early in my career, I probably didn't do that so much. And I really learned from that, like, because you find out after you walk into the company, then you get all these surprises, and surprises that aren't necessarily good.
Right.
But yeah, I think that, looking at the company culture, looking at the reviews, you look at Glassdoor. Glassdoor tells you all kinds of stuff, probably stuff you don't even, it maybe, might have been a disgruntled employee who's just, bashing the company. But sometimes you get some good nuggets out of that and you get information. I look at the companies, if they have warning letters, that tells a tell. If
Mhm.
they, that's all public information. Any kind of, any bad publicity, it's all, you can find all that on the internet now. So I really do a deep dive into what I can find.
And certainly in terms of the warning letters, and nobody's perfect, but at the same time, companies, you tend to see companies that don't, or that getting warning letters, multiple warning letters, how quickly they are, if they don't
Mhm.
value regulatory quality, then you can kind of, obviously it's a flag, it's a data point. One thing I would say about Glassdoor that might be beneficial to our followers, when I talk to candidates about opportunities or about companies relevant to that standpoint, I look at it a little bit differently. I don't really care for the most part what really any specific complaint or positive thing is, because you'll tend to see that unhappy people will be more likely to go on and put things on Glassdoor than positive. And and then depending on levels too, I would say of in terms of responsibility. But I always look at like how many employees, time frame, and it's like what are the total amount of, if they've had 2,000 employees, for example, and there's 360 total comments, and 30% of them are 40% of them are negative, 60% are positive. Look at that as a percentage of the total people, and how relevant is that really to the department you're going to be in, what you're going to be doing in there. A lot of times it doesn't matter. Now, if they have 200 employees and 190 comments and 60% are negative, and that's a completely different thing.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I started my focus on quality because I just love quality, and from a clinical standpoint, care about outcomes. And I felt people in quality have to care about outcomes and people, or why would they be in there? I think regulatory is very similar, but how do you help create a compliance at a company? You have a ton of experience on both sides with regulatory and quality, but how do you create a culture of compliance where RA and QA are working more proactively with other departments within the organization?
Well, compliance starts from the top down. You have to start with if there's a board, you start with the board, with the CEO. It goes down to the senior leadership team, to the directors, managers, and down to the employees. Leadership needs to demonstrate that their commitment to compliance through actions and communication. They need to get the employees involved, provide comprehensive training, have open reporting channels, allow employee empowerment. They need to make compliance real and relevant. They can bring to life the corporate ethics and values. They can share real life stories with the
Mm,
team. And they need to make compliance positive.
yeah.
Consider compliance a proactive approach to ensuring ethical and responsible business practices. It builds trust with the stakeholders, it protects the company's reputation, and I'd say finally include compliance, integrity, and values cross functionally into the business and include those in the code of conduct.
One thing you just said that resonated with me, but I've a friend who's a CEO at a company over in Europe that I met a couple of years ago through LSI Emerging MedTech. And we were having this conversation in Barcelona the year before, and he was talking about when he first came to the company and changes that he needed to make, but the company culture really wasn't focused on understanding the benefit to the patients. And there wasn't a lot of education within the company about how remarkable the product was benefiting patients. So one of the first things that he did was have a team meeting, and he brought in some patients that had been benefiting, and they to talk to the company. And it was just remarkable. He said kind of the benefit and how that empowered and got people excited about what they were doing.
Yeah, I remember I worked at Halyard Health, and I went to their sales meeting. They made infusion pumps, pain pumps. So it was a solution to not using narcotics. And there was a guy who came in, they had a speaker, and he came in and talked. It was a father of a boy. I think the boy was about 18 years old. He got addicted because of surgeries. He got addicted to narcotics. And I remember him telling the story how his son was in the bedroom. He heard a gunshot, and he went into the bedroom, busted in, and held his son as he took his last breath.
Oh my
He
gosh.
was addicted to drugs, and he couldn't get off of them. And he just ended his life. And he told this story, and everybody was sobbing. But it showed how important what we do is to everybody. And that's what I mean by make it real and relevant. Tell the real life stories of how your product is impacting the
Mm.
patients.
Oh,
I'm going to
absolutely.
cry just thinking about it now.
Yeah, you just put a lump in my throat. And I've always been, even when I tore my Achilles, and it was one of the worst pains, three different kinds of pains, really types of pain that I've had. And I still didn't want to take what they wanted to give me for pain, because just so many stories, and even seeing stories where people that were really successful, things are going well, and they end up having surgery, and they get addicted and lose everything. So I think solutions that bring positive patient solutions, right?
Right.
So, because at the end of the day, I mean, our mission statement is to help people grow and career advancement opportunities, but ultimately to build companies that are bringing positive products to patient populations.
Right.
And that's why I could really get excited and get on my soapbox. But I think every company, regulatory affairs and quality should have key leadership and stakeholders that they're not just a function. They are part strategically of direction, because it's best for everybody. Everybody should be a stakeholder when it comes to quality. And if you put out products that are safe, obviously they got to be cost effective and reproducible, but the benefit to the patient has to be paramount. And those that do that put the patient first, and then the team second. The financial stakeholders, it follows. There's so much data and history around that being the case.
Yeah, I agree. I always say that quality isn't just the quality department. It's not just regulatory and quality. It's everybody's responsibility within the whole company.
Yes. Okay. Well, I think uh, that was great. So one of the things I wanted to get your perspective on, and in my experience, all from mid-level all the way up to the VP, the executive level, and regulatory and quality, I find that there are people that are very regulatory focused, very quality, and then regulatory and quality, they tend to have a preference, typically one way or the other. I think it's really interesting. Your background is somewhat, I think, really balanced, because you've done so much on both sides. But can you give your perspective on how an executive team should look at these functions at their company?
Yeah. So RA and QA, as we've talked about, I mean, they're often viewed negatively. Not, in a lot of companies, unfortunately. I've heard the department referred to as the police, which I hate this term, the sales prevention team, dare I say. And
I've heard
it's
that one. Okay.
It's awful. And I mean, it's funny, but it's not funny. So, and it's often considered as just overhead, and if the executive team has a negative attitude about the department, then that will trickle down to each level, and there will always be resistance with and compliance issues with any company.
Mhm.
Um, the executive team needs to be positive, in my opinion, when referring to the RAQ department. Talk about the value that they add to the company, how RAQA keeps the company safe by ensuring compliance. It saves the company money by avoiding pitfalls.
Mhm.
RAQA, sorry about that. RAQA manages submissions and is a key factor in bringing product to market, which makes the company money. Non-compliance costs money, and it's way cheaper to be proactive than reactive.
Yes. I did a I did a webinar, an informational webinar last year. I think it was in maybe in the second quarter, but it took all this data around compensations. So data around recalls, non-conformance, CAPAs, essentially starting up there with materials first, and then working down to complaints, to recalls, and the exorbitant cost as you go, going down the way we shared the data, but as you escalate the issue, right, the
Yeah.
cost around that. And I think companies tend to look at compensations partially because of what you just described, because in my humble opinion, they're not looking they're looking at it as a cost. They shouldn't be, because if it's done right, it actually brings more money into the company. And the data shows that by skimming on what you're paying or on the talent piece, it leads to more issues that cost a lot more money in the long run. And it was really interesting looking at that data, but it certainly supports what you're saying, and understanding that. And I think the police thing, I still love your perspective on this, but you certainly don't want to hire, and I evaluate that in a personality standpoint when I'm supporting
Mhm.
a client in terms of bringing on talent, whether they have that mentality, because nobody wants to work with the police. They want to work with somebody. A quality person has to understand, like, what do we have to do right now? What do we need to do or probably get to within the next 90 days? But you can't just shut everything down unless, again, patient safety first. There's got to be, how do you work with them? But at the same time, also, I think sometimes cultures create that, they are attracting that because they're not valuing it, and creating
Mhm.
cross department communication and an environment that respects and understands that quality is everybody's responsibility.
Yeah, and what from my experience, when a company doesn't value quality and regulatory, it makes the regulatory team a lot. They are always on guard, and they
Mhm.
always feel like they have to provide, you know, I mean, we should anyways, but provide that documentation. They want to say no to everything that they want to do, because, instead of providing solutions, because if sometimes in that situation, the whole story, you give them an inch, they take a mile. You say, well, we could do it this time, then they're like, well, you let us do it before, you know? So
Right.
I yeah, I mean, in the way I like to look at things, I mean, and I've had to like kind of retrain a group before to be like, no, let's, like trust but verify. Let's get, let's see what the solutions are. It's risk-based approach. Look at the business as a whole. And I like to
Mm.
provide like three solutions, maybe a high risk solution, a medium risk, and a low risk, and of course the low risk is going to be doing everything by the book, exactly how we're supposed to be doing it. Where on high risk might be like, well, we just provide a really good justification and, cross our fingers and hope for the best, you know. Just to defend ourselves. Like we want to have like that, like the documentation. Of course, we always have documentation to support our decision making, but that decision making better be very strong.
Absolutely. So, and we kind of, obviously we've already talked, or I referenced sort of warning letters. I guess that kind of segues into the next question. And as we've sort of talked about why companies should respect regulatory and quality, understand the associated cost to that company, and then for non-compliance in terms of internal procedures, processes, and what the regulations are, and striking up that balance, but bringing a environment where people are communicating. There aren't silos. Silos typically lead to major problems. But warning letters, as mentioned, are extensive cost, and it's every single year over $6 billion annually to the industry. So would love for you to share your insight, some, as specific as you can. Obviously we're not here to beat anybody up, but things happen. I use Philips as an example, and I don't take any pleasure in it. I helped bring the Trilogy ventilator to the market. It was a really cool time in my career, helping patients and doing trials and things of that nature. It really was kind of heartbreaking to me personally when that situation happened. It's cost them somewhere, 1.2, 1.3, 1.4 billion dollars at this point. So learning through what's going on in the marketplace, those that don't respect how this matters, kind of beware. So would love to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah. I've had a couple of instances that really stand out throughout my career, and I'll tell you about one that I worked at. So I took a position, and I'll name the company because it's actually turned out it was a happy ending. So I worked I worked at Kimberly Clark, which was previously iFlow. I took the position, and unbeknownst to me, my first day was the last week of a 6-week, like really bad FDA inspection, which they made the infusion pump. And it went so bad that they received 10 observations from the FDA or findings, and they had 2 additional from the state. And there was also a warning letter previously, in like 3 years previous to this inspection under iFlow, that they still had, out there that wasn't closed. So that resulted in I had to then respond to we had to get like attorneys, outside counsel. We had to hire multiple contractors. We had to do mock FDA inspections. So they were coming in like every quarter. They just unannounced, like, do a mock FDA inspection. I think that they would make an announcement over the loudspeaker, and they used, like, I think our keyword was peanut butter or something like that. And then we knew, the FDA is here. We got to, get everybody on deck, And we had late nights, like we worked really late night meetings. It was always like, like I said, all hands on deck with everything. I spent a lot of my time responding to the FDA monthly, and then quarterly I had to respond to the state and let them know what our updates were throughout the whole process. And they came back about it over a year later. It was unannounced, and they showed up, and because of all the hard work, but we ended up resulting in the inspection ended up resulting in 0 483s. We wiped out the warning letter, and everything was like, it turned out really well. But it was so expensive, all of the money and the time and the effort that went into preparing for that return visit.
I always say, if you do transactional, you get transactional. And it's really one of the reasons why we created Top Talent Accelerant, using the video technology, attracting talent to kind of differentiate, and starting to bring that back to the hiring managers, along with additional tools to vet the cultural fit. So there's not as much time and resources wasted on interviewing people that they were never going to go there, or maybe they don't have the right skills. More of that up front. And I always say, if the quality management system, like looking at talent, the quality management system for the processes international should match the quality management system for the product. In that case, maybe not the upfront one, right? Because that wouldn't be good. But one of the chief medical officers that I gotten to know this last year, he gets paid well, and I was like, wow, like you're kind of the topper in. And he said, you know what? It's amazing to me how much companies will pay to do a project twice versus just pay to get up front. And he said, so yeah, I'm okay with that, but guess what? In my areas, and if you have a clinical trial and leadership around medical affairs and vigilance, he's like, I'm a sure thing. Like I'm every penny. And I thought that was a really, really interesting statement. And to your point, it's like all of the pain and additional cost that comes around that. And then also from a positivity, how it affects your culture and the negative exposure, it's hard to even gauge the impact that has. And those dastardly recruiters that are always looking for people to go to their companies too, right? If there's something going on, you know that they're calling all your people.
You know what though? I would say although it was hard, it was a really great experience and I learned a ton from it. So I'm really actually very thankful that I went through all of that because I got a lot of experience going through that process. The other story, I'll touch on the other story that I had was I worked at a company and I knew 2 weeks in that it was not a good company. And they were asking me shortly after I was writing the 510Ks, and they wanted me to sign off on some documents that I didn't feel comfortable signing off on. They were the declarations to the 510K. One was for design control, one was for verification and validation. And per the regulation, the person that's responsible for those activities is the one that's supposed to sign off on them. And they wanted me to sign off. And
so to be clear, somebody else actually did the inputs, outputs, and created a design history file, but they wanted you to be the one to sign off. Okay.
Yeah, and I didn't feel comfortable doing that. And so the VP, the person that was the VP at the time, which was a couple levels above me, said, you need to sign off on this. And I'm like, I said, I'm not signing those. And he said, well, you need to sign them. And he grilled me for about an hour and a half on why I need to sign them. And I said, look, R&D won't sign them. Quality won't sign them. My own manager won't sign them. Why should I sign them? And he said, fine, I'll sign them. And I said, great, we're good. Then he pulled me and my manager into his office and grilled us for another hour and a half on how we need to get trained and we need to sign off on them in the future. And I told my manager, I said, I'm not signing those. It makes me uncomfortable that the R&D team, who's responsible for those activities, does not want to sign them. Like, why? I left the company a few months later. I found another position. And I got a call from and I never signed off on anything. And I got a call about 2 years later, I got a call from the FDA and he said, hi, I'm Inspector so-and-so. I'm doing a criminal investigation on this company and I have some questions for you. And so they interviewed a lot of people. They gathered their information. A year later, they went back to that company and they got a really bad, FDA inspection.
Yes. And I would guess that it was not anywhere near worth the corners that were cut.
No, I would think not. So